"They're gonna kill her," Marcus whispers, cradling the newborn closer to his chest as footsteps echo through the abandoned building. 20 years old and homeless since aging out of foster care, he never imagined a simple shoebox would change everything. The baby girl, barely breathing when he found her behind Chen's convenience store, now depends on him for survival. But he's not the only one who wants her. The January wind whips through broken windows as Marcus backs away from approaching shadows. His threadbare jacket offers little protection against Chicago's brutal winter, but he'd rather freeze than let them catch him. The designer blanket wrapped around the infant, monogrammed with a delicate P, marked her as someone important, too important. The news confirmed his fears. Tech billionaire James Chen and his wife murdered, their newborn daughter missing, and now killers hunting through the city's darkest corners. For 2 years, Marcus perfected the art of invisibility on these streets. No connections, no traces, no reason to be remembered. But as the baby stirs against his chest, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb, he realizes there's no going back. He'll protect her or die trying. They think a homeless kid will be easy prey. They're wrong. Marcus knows every shadow in this city, every escape route, every forgotten space where a man can disappear. Only this time, he's not running away. He's running toward something worth fighting for. Before we start the video, buckle up, get ready and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Marcus pressed his back against the cold brick wall, listening to the footsteps approaching from the alley. 3 sets, maybe 4. They thought they were being quiet, but 2 years on the streets had taught him to hear everything. He slowly exhaled, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid Chicago air. The cardboard box beside him contained everything he owned: a spare shirt, a half-empty water bottle, and the sandwich he'd saved from the shelter. Not much to defend, but it was his. The first figure appeared at the mouth of the alley, a tall kid wearing a red hoodie that seemed to glow in the dim streetlight. Marcus recognized it. Travis used to be decent enough until he started running with Dex's crew. Now he was just another predator, looking to climb the homeless hierarchy. "We know you're back there, Marcus," Travis called out, his voice echoing off the narrow walls. "Dex says, this is our territory now. Time for you to find somewhere else to sleep." Marcus remained silent, counting the shadows behind Travis. 3 others, just as he thought. Bad odds, but he'd faced worse. His fingers curled around the metal pipe he'd stashed behind the dumpster 2 weeks ago. Always have a backup plan. That was his first rule of survival. "Look, we don't want trouble," Travis continued, taking another step forward. "Just grab your stuff and go. Plenty of other alleys in Chicago." That was true enough. Chicago had no shortage of dark corners where a person could disappear. Marcus had mapped them all in his mind, categorized them by safety, shelter, and proximity to food sources. This spot, though, this was prime real estate. 3 blocks from a shelter that actually gave a damn, close enough to the tourist areas to score some cash, but far enough that the cops didn't hassle you. More importantly, it was his. He'd earned it. Last chance, Travis warned, now close enough that Marcus could smell the cheap beer on his breath. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Marcus moved fast, years of practice making his movements fluid. The pipe came up just as Travis lunged, catching the bigger youth off guard. Metal met flesh with a dull thud, and Travis stumbled backward into his friend. Marcus didn't wait to see the result. He snatched his cardboard box and darted past the group, using their moment of confusion to his advantage. "Get him!" Travis shouted, his voice thick with pain and rage. Marcus ran, his worn sneakers silent against the wet pavement. He knew these streets better than anyone. Every shortcut, every fence with loose boards, every loading dock where you could duck and hide. Tonight, though, he didn't need to hide. He just needed to show them why this was his territory. He cut through an abandoned lot, hearing their heavy footsteps behind it. They were stronger, but he was smarter. Marcus dropped his box behind a pile of debris, making sure they saw him do it. As expected, they slowed, probably thinking he was ditching his possessions to run faster. Instead, he circled back, using the shadows and his dark clothing to his advantage. Travis and his crew clustered around the box, backs turned to him. Perfect. Marcus struck quickly, the pipe finding the back of Travis's knee. The larger boy went down with a cry of surprise. The others turned, but Marcus was already moving, striking at legs and arms with precision. No headshots, nothing that could cause permanent damage. That was his second rule. Survive, but don't become the monster. In less than a minute, it was over. Travis and his friends lay groaning on the ground, nursing bruises that would remind them why this territory belonged to Marcus. He retrieved his box, checking to make sure nothing had spilled out. "Next time bring more people," Marcus told them, his voice calm and controlled. "Or better yet, find your own spot." He waited until they had limped away before allowing himself to feel the fear and adrenaline. His hands shook as he set the pipe down, carefully wrapping it in an old t-shirt before stashing it in his box. Violence was sometimes necessary for survival, but he never enjoyed it. Each fight brought back memories of foster homes, where strength was the only language anyone understood. Marcus found a relatively clean spot against a wall and sat down, pulling his knees to his chest for warmth. The temperature was dropping fast, and his thin jacket did little to keep out the cold. He should go to the shelter, but after the fight, he needed space, needed to be invisible for a while. The sound of traffic from the nearby street provided a familiar lullaby as Marcus closed his eyes. He thought about the day he aged out of the system, standing outside the group home with nothing but a backpack and empty promises about support services. For a while, he tried to make it work, got a job at a fast food place, rented a room in a sketchy part of town. But minimum wage didn't cover Chicago rent, and one missed paycheck was all it took to end up on the streets. A police siren wailed in the distance, and Marcus instinctively pressed himself deeper into the shadows. 2 years of homelessness had taught him to be invisible. No one looked too closely at the shapes in dark alley. No one wanted to see the people society had forgotten. Usually, that worked in his favor. Tonight, though, as the temperature continued to drop and his stomach growled despite the sandwich in his box, Marcus allowed himself to wonder if there was more to life than just surviving. He pulled out the sandwich, carefully unwrapping it from its napkin. Half a turkey on wheat, slightly squashed but still good. He'd learned to make food last, to ignore the hunger until it became unbearable. As he ate, he watched the cars pass by on the street, their headlights creating strange shadows on the alley walls. Each vehicle contained people heading home to warm beds and full refrigerators. Normal lives that seemed as distant to him as the stars barely visible through Chicago's light pollution. The sandwich was gone too quickly, leaving him still hungry, but less desperately so. Marcus checked his water bottle, rationing out a small sip. The shelter would be serving breakfast in 6 hours. He could make it until then. He always did. Movement at the entrance to the alley caught his attention. Marcus tensed, ready for Travis and his crew to return with reinforcement. Instead, he saw a familiar figure shuffling past. Old Joe, pushing his cart full of cans and bottles. The old man nodded in Marcus's direction, but didn't stop. They had an understanding. Most of the regular street people did. Respect each other's territory, don't draw attention, and help when you can without getting too involved. Marcus settled back against the wall, pulling his box closer. Inside, along with his few possessions, was a worn photograph. He rarely looked at it anymore, but he knew every detail by heart. A younger version of himself, maybe 7 or 8, standing between his parents outside their small house. Before the accident that took them both, before the system, before everything fell apart. The photo was a reminder of what he'd lost, but also of what he'd gained: strength, independence, the ability to survive anything life threw at him. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus reminded himself that being invisible wasn't the same as being powerless. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new chances to prove he deserved his place in this harsh world. For now, though, he had his territory, his box of meager possessions, and the hard-won knowledge that he could handle whatever came next. The temperature dropped further as night settled over Chicago, forcing Marcus to seek better shelter. He gathered his box and made his way toward Chen's convenience store, one of the few 24-hour establishments in the area that didn't immediately call the cops on homeless. Mr. Chen, the owner, was decent enough to let Marcus hang around the back of the store during particularly cold nights, as long as the wind cut through Marcus's jacket like it wasn't even there. His fingers had gone numb, despite being tucked into his armpits, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. He needed warmth, and he needed it soon. The alley behind Chen's offered some protection from the wind, thanks to the tall buildings on either side. As he rounded the corner into the alley, Marcus noticed something different. The usual pile of cardboard boxes had been disturbed, and there was a strange sound coming from behind them. At first, he thought it might be a cat, but the sound was too regular, too human, a whimper. Marcus approached cautiously, years of street survival instincts making him wary of any change in his environment. He set his box down quietly and peered around the stack of cardboard. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A shoebox sat partially hidden behind the larger boxes, its lid slightly askew. Inside, wrapped in what looked like an expensive blanket, was a baby. The infant's face was tinged blue from the cold, its whimpers growing weaker by the second. Marcus froze, his mind racing. This was exactly the kind of situation he avoided, the kind of complication that got street people into trouble. But as he watched, the baby's movements became more sluggish, and he knew he couldn't walk away. He reached for the shoebox, his hands shaking from more than just the cold. The blanket was soft, definitely expensive, with a delicate P monogrammed in one corner. The baby was tiny, probably newborn, with dark skin and a full head of black hair. As Marcus lifted the infant, he could feel how cold it was, even through the blanket. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, tucking the baby inside his jacket. The warmth of the small body against his chest stirred something in him, memories of a time when he'd been cared for, protected. Let's get you someplace warm. Marcus knew he had one option. Sarah, a nurse at the free clinic 3 blocks away, sometimes worked late. She was one of the few people who had shown him kindness without wanting anything in return. If anyone would help without asking too many questions, it would be her. He hurried through the empty streets, one arm cradling the baby against his chest, the other clutching his box. The infant's whimpers had grown quieter, which Marcus knew wasn't a good sign. He picked up his pace, ignoring the burning in his tired legs. The clinic's lights were still on, and Marcus sent up a silent prayer of thanks. He knocked on the back door, the one Sarah had shown him months ago when he'd come in with a badly infected cut. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, Sarah's face appeared in the window. She opened the door quickly, taking in Marcus's desperate expression. "What's wrong?" Without speaking, Marcus opened his jacket enough to show her the baby. Sarah's eyes widened, but to her credit, she didn't waste time with questions. She ushered him inside and led him to an exam room. "How long has the baby been in the cold?" she asked, already gathering supplies. "Don't know. Found it behind Chen's maybe 15 minutes ago." Sarah worked quickly, checking the baby's temperature and vital sign. She wrapped the infant in warm blankets and placed a tiny oxygen mask over its face. Gradually, the blue tinge faded from the baby's skin, replaced by a healthier pink color. "It's a girl," Sarah told him as she worked, "and she can't be more than a few days old." "Where exactly did you find her?" Marcus described the scene at Chen's, including the monogram blanket. Sarah listened while continuing to care for the baby, her expression growing more concerned. "We need to call the police," she said finally. "Number." The word came out sharper than Marcus intended. "They'll think I had something to do with it." "Marcus, this is a newborn baby. There could be parents looking for her." "Then why was she in a shoebox behind a convenience store?" He paced the small exam room, running his hands through his short hair. "Something's not right about this. Give me a day to figure it out, please." Sarah hesitated, looking between Marcus and the baby. "She needs proper care, Marcus. Food, warmth, medical attention. Can you help with that? Just for a day?" He met her eyes, letting her see his desperation. "You know what happens to kids in the system. Give me a chance to find out what's going on first." Sarah sighed, but Marcus could see her resolve weakening. "One day, and you stay here with her where I can monitor her condition." "Deal." Marcus sat in the chair next to the exam table where the baby lay. She was sleeping now, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily under the blanket. "Can you show me what to do?" Over the next few hours, Sarah taught Marcus the basics of infant care: how to hold her properly, how to feed her with the formula they kept at the clinic, how to check if her diaper needed changing. Marcus absorbed everything, his street-honed survival instincts adapting to this new challenge. As morning approached, Sarah turned on the small television in the corner of the room, keeping the volume low. Marcus was dozing in the chair, the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms, when a news report caught his attention. "Breaking news in the deaths of tech billionaire James Chen and his wife, Lisa Chen," the reporter announced. "Police are now investigating the car crash that killed the couple as a potential homicide. Sources say that Chen's newborn daughter is missing. The baby, Piper Chen, was not in the vehicle at the time of the crash." Marcus's blood ran cold as the reporter held up a photo. The same blanket that had been wrapped around the baby in the shoebox was clearly visible, complete with the monogrammed P. Sarah, who had also been watching, turned to Marcus with wide eyes. "That's not just any abandoned baby, is it?" "No," Marcus replied, looking down at the sleeping infant in his arms. "This is Piper Chen, and someone wants her dead." The baby stirred, her small hand gripping Marcus's finger. In that moment, he knew his life of staying invisible was over. Someone had tried to kill this child, had murdered her parents, and left her to freeze to death in an alley. The same people would be looking for her, wanting to finish what they'd started. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice firm, "I need to know everything you can tell me about keeping a baby alive and healthy. And then I need supplies, as much as you can spare." Sarah studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I'll help, but Marcus, be careful. This is bigger than anything you've dealt with before." "I know." He gently stroked Piper's cheek with one finger. "But I can't walk away. Not from this." As Sarah gathered supplies, Marcus watched the sun rise through the clinic's window. He had spent 2 years learning to survive on his own, to stay unnoticed and uninvolved. Now, holding this tiny life in his arms, he realized that survival wasn't enough anymore. For the first time since his parents died, he had something worth fighting for. Outside, the city was waking up. Soon, the streets would be full of people going about their normal lives, unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Marcus knew that somewhere out there, the people who had killed the Chens were probably already looking for their daughter. They would be professional, thorough, and deadly. But Marcus had advantages they didn't. He knew every hidden corner of this city, every escape route, every safe haven. He had survived on these streets when everyone said he couldn't. Now, he would use those same skills to keep Piper alive, no matter what it took. The baby yawned in her sleep, her face turning toward his chest. Marcus adjusted the blanket around her, making sure she was warm enough. He had no illusions about what he was getting into. This would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But looking at Piper's innocent face, he knew it was also the most important. Sarah returned with a bag full of supplies: formula, diapers, bottles, and basic medical supplies. "This is everything I can spare," she said. "It should last a few days at least." "Thank you," Marcus replied, carefully standing with Piper in his arms. "For everything." "Just be careful," Sarah warned. "And Marcus, if you need help, come back. Don't try to handle everything alone." Marcus nodded, though they both knew he wouldn't risk returning unless he had no other choice. He couldn't put Sarah in danger, couldn't let her become another target for whoever was hunting Piper. As he prepared to leave the clinic, Marcus caught his reflection in the window. He barely recognized himself, this person holding a baby with such care and determination. But maybe that was the point. Maybe sometimes life forced you to become someone new, someone stronger than you ever thought you could be. Marcus kept to the shadows as he made his way through Chicago's morning streets, Piper secured against his chest in a makeshift sling Sarah had created from clean medical sheets. His cardboard box of possessions had been sacrificed to make room for the baby supplies in his arm. The morning commuters barely glanced at him, their eyes sliding past as if he were invisible. Today, that was exactly what he needed. He had nearly reached the abandoned building he sometimes used as a backup shelter when he noticed the man in the black coat. Nothing obvious marked him as a threat, but Marcus's instincts screamed danger. The man's posture was too rigid, his attention too focused while pretending not to be. When Marcus turned down an alley, the man followed the other end of the alley, wearing an identical black coat. Marcus's heart rate spiked, but he kept his pace steady. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with Piper depending on him. "Just hand over the baby," the first man called out, his voice professionally calm. "Walk away, and you'll never hear from us again." Marcus assessed his options. The men blocked both ends of the alley. The buildings on either side were too tall to climb, especially with a baby. But he knew something they didn't. This particular alley had a secret. "No one has to get hurt," the second man added, moving closer. "You did a good thing, keeping her alive. Now let us take care of her." Marcus backed toward the middle of the alley, making it look like indecision. The men advanced slowly, obviously trained to handle situations like this, but they weren't trained for the street, not like he was. When they were both about 20 feet away, Marcus dropped to his knees and yanked up the loose manhole cover he knew was hidden under a piece of cardboard. The men rushed forward, but Marcus was already climbing down the maintenance ladder, pulling the cover back over his head. The tunnel below was pitch black, but Marcus had memorized its layout months ago. He moved quickly through the darkness, one hand keeping Piper secure against his chest, the other trailing along the wall for guidance. Above, he could hear the men arguing about following him into the tunnels. After several turns in the darkness, Marcus found what he was looking for: a maintenance door, usually locked, but with hinges he'd carefully weakened over time. One solid kick near the bottom corner, and it swung open. Beyond lay an access tunnel that would take him to the basement of an abandoned department store. He had just climbed the stairs to the store's ground floor when he heard the echo of footsteps in the tunnel below. The men had followed after all. Marcus moved faster, weaving through the empty aisles of dusty shelves. Piper stirred against his chest, but stayed remarkably quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. The store had multiple exits, but Marcus knew they'd be watching them all by now. Instead, he headed for the loading dock. The roll-up door would be locked, but there was a broken window near the top, partially hidden behind an old shelving unit. He'd used it before when he needed to disappear quickly. Marcus had just reached the shelving unit when the first gunshot rang out. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and he felt the wind of the bullet passing close by. These men weren't playing around anymore. He scrambled up the shelves one-handed, his other arm keeping Piper tight against him. Another shot, this one splintering the wood near his head. Marcus reached the window and pulled himself through, ignoring the bite of broken glass against his skin. The drop to the alley below was longer than he remembered, but he managed to land in a roll that protected Piper from the impact. His shoulders screamed in pain, but he forced himself to his feet and ran. Behind him, he could hear the men shouting coordinates into phones or radio. Marcus ran without direction, taking random turns, doubling back, anything to break their pursuit. His lungs burned and his legs trembled, but he didn't slow down. The weight of Piper against his chest reminded him what he was fighting for. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Marcus found himself in an unfamiliar neighborhood. The streets here were cleaner, the buildings better maintained. He stuck to the shadows between parked cars, trying to catch his breath and figure out his next move. "Over here," a woman's voice called out softly. Marcus spun toward the sound, ready to run again. A well-dressed Asian woman stood in a doorway, her hand extended in a gesture that managed to be both commanding and non-threatening. "I can help you protect her," the woman said. But we need to move now. They're still looking. Marcus hesitated. The woman's face was familiar, though he couldn't place why. She must have read his uncertainty. My name is Grace Chen, she said. Piper is my niece. And you're right, someone is trying to kill her. The name clicked into place. He'd seen her in the news coverage about the Chen's deaths, but that didn't mean he could trust her. Prove it, he demanded, keeping his distance. Grace pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. It was clearly taken recently, showing her with James and Lisa Chen. All three were smiling, and Lisa was visibly pregnant. The blanket Piper was wrapped in, Grace continued. I gave it to Lisa at her baby shower. Hand embroidered the P myself. You can check the stitching. Marcus glanced down at the blanket still visible beneath the medical sheet sling. The pieces started falling into place, but one question remained. Why should I trust you? Because right now, I'm your only chance of keeping her alive. Grace's expression softened. And because you've already proven you're willing to die to protect her, let me help you do it better. A car engine revved nearby, and Marcus saw a black sedan turning slowly onto the street. Grace noticed too. Decide quickly, she said, but know that if you run, they'll find you eventually, and next time they won't risk warning shot. Marcus looked at the woman in the doorway, then down at Piper sleeping against his chest. He'd promised himself he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Maybe that meant trusting someone else for the first time in years. Okay, he said, moving toward the door, but the first sign that you're lying, we're gone. Grace nodded, ushering him inside. Fair enough, but right now we need to move. I have a safe house ready. The interior of the building was as upscale as its exterior suggested. Grace led him through a marble-floored lobby to a service elevator. As they rode up, Marcus noticed her studying him. Thank you, she said quietly, for saving her, for protecting her. Marcus nodded, but didn't respond. He wasn't ready for gratitude, not when he still wasn't sure who to trust. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment, its windows offering a view of the city he usually only saw from the street. The bathroom is through there, Grace said, pointing. There's a first aid kit under the sink. Clean yourself up while I check on Piper. Marcus realized he was bleeding from several cuts, probably from the broken window. He looked down at Piper, reluctant to let her go. I know you don't trust me, Grace said gently, but she needs to be checked over by someone who knows what they're doing, and you need to take care of those cuts before they get infected. Slowly, carefully, Marcus unwrapped the sling and handed Piper to her aunt. The baby stirred but didn't wake, settling easily into Grace's arms. Something about the way Grace held her, with such natural care and protection, helped ease Marcus's anxiety. In the bathroom, Marcus found not just a first aid kit, but clean clothes in what looked like his size. He treated his cuts and changed quickly, not wanting to leave Piper alone for too long. When he returned to the main room, he found Grace sitting in a rocking chair, feeding Piper with what looked like a much more expensive version of the formula Sarah had given him. She's perfectly healthy, Grace reported. A little cold maybe, but no worse for wear. You did well. Marcus sank into a nearby chair, the events of the past 24 hours catching up with him. Who were those men? What do they want with her? Grace's expression hardened. That's a complicated story, but the short version is that my brother's company was developing something revolutionary, something worth killing for, apparently. What does that have to do with Piper? Everything, Grace replied. James' built-in safeguard. The technology can only be accessed through genetic authentication. With James and Lisa dead, Piper is the key to everything. Marcus leaned forward, processing this info. So they won't stop coming after her? No, Grace confirmed. They won't, which is why we need to work together. I have resources, connections, you have street smarts, and survival skills. Together, we might be able to keep her alive long enough to expose who's behind this. Marcus watched as Grace burped Piper with practiced ease. Everything about this situation was far beyond his experience. Corporate espionage, murder, technology worth killing for. But when he looked at Piper, none of that mattered. She was just a baby who needed protection, and he had already decided he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Okay, he said finally. What's our next move? First, we rest, Grace replied. You look dead on your feet, and we'll need to be sharp. There's a bedroom through there. Get some sleep. I'll watch Piper. Marcus wanted to argue, but exhaustion was making his thoughts fuzzy. Wake me if anything happens. Anything at all. Grace nodded. I will. And Marcus, thank you for trusting me. As Marcus lay down on what felt like the softest bed he'd ever encountered, he realized trust wasn't quite the right word. He didn't trust Grace, not completely, but he trusted her love for Piper. For now, that would have to be enough. Marcus woke to the sound of Piper crying. His body tensed instinctively before he remembered where he was. The penthouse. Grace. Safety, at least for now. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, suggesting he'd slept for trying to warm a bottle while bouncing a fussy Piper. Without thinking, Marcus held out his arm. Grace handed the baby over, and to both their surprise, Piper calmed almost immediately. "She remembers you," Grace said, checking the formula temperature. "Babies can sense who makes them feel safe." Marcus adjusted Piper in his arm, marveling at how natural it felt already. "Tell me everything. About the technology. About who might want Piper dead. I need to know what we're up against." Grace handed him the bottle and sat down at the kitchen island. James was developing an artificial intelligence system, unlike anything that exists. Most AI learns from data, but James found a way to incorporate human intuition, emotional intelligence. He called it the empathy engine. What does that mean? It means he created an AI that could truly understand human emotions, not just simulate them. The applications are endless. Healthcare, education, mental health treatment. Grace's expression darkened, or in the wrong hands, manipulation on a scale never before possible. Piper drank her formula contentedly while Marcus processed this information. And the genetic authentication? James built it into the core code. The system requires regular verification from someone with Chen DNA. Without it, the AI starts to degrade. It was his failsafe, ensuring the technology couldn't be stolen or misused. Grace ran a hand through her hair. "But he never told me Piper would be part of that system. So whoever killed James and Lisa needs Piper alive. They need her DNA, not necessarily her." Grace's voice was grim. "A blood sample would be enough. They have no reason to keep her alive after that." Marcus held Piper closer instinctively. "Who are we dealing with?" "I suspect Harrison Wells, James's VP of Research and Development. He always resented that James wouldn't give him full access to the project." Grace pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a photo of a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. "But I can't prove anything yet." "What about the men who chased me?" "Professional mercenaries, probably. Wells has connections to private military contractors from his previous work." Grace took Piper to burp her. "The safe house is secure for now, but we need to be ready to move. They'll find us eventually." Marcus walked to the window, scanning the surrounding building. His street instincts were on high alert, despite the luxury surrounding. "We need supply, and I need you to teach me everything about taking care of a baby." Over the next few hours, Grace gave Marcus a crash course in infant care, how to properly prepare formula, the correct temperature for bathwater, signs of illness to watch for. Marcus absorbed everything with the same intensity he'd used to learn street survival. "You're good with her," Grace observed as Marcus successfully changed his first diaper. "Natural instincts. Had to take care of my little sister sometimes before." Marcus rarely spoke about his life before the street, but something about Grace's directness made it easy. Foster homes weren't always reliable. Grace seemed to understand what he wasn't saying. "James and I grew up in foster care too after our parents died. Different experience, probably. We got lucky with a good placement. But I understand not trusting the system." Their conversation was interrupted by Grace's phone buzzing. She checked it, her expression turning serious. "My contact at Chen Technologies just confirmed Wells called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." "That's bad?" "Very. He's probably making his move to take control of the company." Grace started pacing. "We need proof of what he did before that meeting." Marcus watched her move across the room, noting the tension in her shoulders. "You have a plan?" "Maybe. The proof we need would be in Wells's private server, but the building's security is state-of-the-art." She turned to face him. "Unless you know another way in." Marcus thought about the maintenance tunnels he'd used earlier. "Every building has blind spots, but I'd need to see the layout." Grace pulled up building schematics on her tablet. While Piper napped in a makeshift crib, they spent the next hour studying entry points and security patterns. Marcus was surprised to find Grace had a sharp tactical mind beneath her polished exterior. "The loading dock has possibility," he said, pointing to the blueprint. "But we'd need a distraction. I can handle that part. I still have building access. I'll request a meeting with Wells. Keep him occupied." Grace zoomed in on the server room location. "But we have another problem. The server room requires biometric access. Wells's fingerprints and retinal scan." Marcus smiled slightly. "You'd be surprised what you can learn on the streets. I know someone who can help with that, but we'll need a recent photo of Wells. Close up, high resolution." Grace raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask how Marcus had such a connection. "I can get photos from the company website." "But Marcus, this is dangerous. If you get caught." "I won't," he interrupted. "I've spent 2 years being invisible when I needed to be. One more time won't be a problem." They were interrupted by Piper's cry. Marcus reached her first, lifting her with practiced gentleness. As he checked her diaper, he felt Grace watching him. "What?" "Nothing. Just thinking how strange life is." She smiled sadly. "A week ago, James was talking about how he and Lisa would raise Piper to change the world. Now here we are, planning a heist to expose his murder, while a homeless young man I just met takes better care of his daughter than most experienced parents." Marcus focused on changing Piper, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just keeping her alive until we sort this out." "No," Grace said softly. "You're doing much more than that. You're giving her what every child needs: safety, love, protection." "Love?" Marcus scoffed. But even as he did, He knew she was right. Somehow, in less than a day, this tiny person had worked her way past all his carefully constructed barriers. "You can pretend all you want," Grace said, reading his expression, "but I see how you look at her, how you respond to her every sound. You love her already. That's why I trust you to help me protect her." Marcus finished changing Piper and lifted her to his shoulder, breathing in her baby scent. "We should focus on the plan. What time is the board meeting tomorrow?" Grace allowed the subject change. 9 a.m. "We'll need to move tonight. Retrieve the evidence, and get it to the board members before Wells can consolidate his position. And after? Assuming we get the proof, Wells goes to jail. The company goes to the backup board of directors until Piper's old enough." Grace hesitated. "She'll need a guardian in the meantime." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "You're her aunt. That's your job." "Yes, but she'll need more than just me." Grace touched his arm gently. "We don't have to decide everything now. First, we need to survive the night." They spent the next few hours refining their plan. Grace made calls to trusted contacts, arranging for evidence to be delivered to board members the moment they retrieved it. Marcus studied the building layouts until he could reproduce them from memory. As evening approached, Grace ordered food delivered through a secure service she trusted. They ate in relative silence, both lost in thought about what was to come. Piper slept peacefully, unaware of the dangers surrounding her. "We should leave in an hour," Grace said, checking her phone. "Security shifts change at 8. That's our best window." Marcus nodded, but his attention was on Piper. "What about her? We can't take her with us, but we can't leave her alone." "My contact? The one who confirmed the board meeting? She's coming to watch her. Amy's been my friend since college. I trust her with my life." As if on cue, there was a pattern of knocks at the door. Grace checked the security camera before letting in a petite woman with short red hair. Amy's eyes went immediately to Piper. "Oh my God, she looks just like Lisa," she whispered. Grace made quick introduction. Marcus watched Amy carefully, but his street instincts detected no threat from her. Still, when it came time to hand Piper over, he found himself reluctant. "I'll protect her with my life," Amy promised, reading his hesitation. "I was there when she was born. I'm her godmother." Finally, Marcus placed Piper in Amy's arms. The baby stirred but didn't wake, and Amy immediately began humming a soft lullaby. "Time to go," Grace said, checking her weapon one last time. Marcus hadn't asked where she got the gun, just as she hadn't asked about his street contacts. At the door, Marcus looked back at Piper one last time. Everything in him screamed to stay, to protect her himself. But he knew this was protecting her, even if it meant leaving her temporarily. "Ready?" Grace asked. Marcus nodded, pushing down his emotions and letting the street survivor take over. "Ready." They stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind the safety of the penthouse. Ahead lay danger, uncertain, and their only chance to ensure Piper's future. Marcus touched the lockpick set in his pocket, a reminder of the skills that had kept him alive on the streets. Tonight, those same skills would have to keep loomed above them, its glass exterior reflecting the city lights. Marcus and Grace approached separately. Grace through the main entrance in her business attire, Marcus through the service area in borrowed maintenance coverall. The night shift security was minimal, just as Grace had predicted. Marcus waited in the shadows of the loading dock, counting seconds until Grace's distraction would begin. His borrowed uniform itched, and he fought the urge to scratch. 2 years on the streets had taught him the value of stillness. Right on schedule, alarms began blaring from the opposite side of the building. Security radio chatter indicated a fire in the research labs. Marcus smiled slightly, impressed by Grace's thoroughness. As predicted, the guards at the loading dock rushed to respond, leaving their post unmanned. The service entrance log took Marcus less than 30 seconds to pick. Inside, he moved with purpose, pushing a cleaning cart borrowed from Grace's contact. Anyone watching the security cameras would see just another maintenance worker doing their round. He reached the server room floor without incident. This was where things would get complicated. The door required both fingerprint and retinal authentication. Marcus pulled out the specialized equipment his street contact had provided, along with the high-resolution photos of Wells that Grace had obtained. The fingerprint spoof took another 30 seconds. The retinal scan was trickier, requiring precise positioning of the modified contact lens. Marcus held his breath as the scanner processed. A green light flashed, and the door clicked open. "I'm in," he whispered into the comm unit Grace had given him. "Good," Grace's voice came back, slightly breathless. "Wells is thoroughly distracted by our little fire. You have maybe 10 minutes before they realize it's a false alarm." Marcus moved quickly through the server room, following the memorized directions to Wells's private server. The flash drive Grace had given him contained a program that would copy everything while searching for specific keywords related to the empathy engine and James Chen's murder. As he worked, Marcus thought about Piper. Safe in the penthouse with Amy, everything had to go perfectly, not just for his sake now, but for her future. The file transfer seemed to take forever, though his watch showed only minutes passing. "Marcus, we have a problem." Grace's voice was tense. "Wells is heading back to his office. He's not buying the fire story. Marcus checked the file transfer. Still not complete. How long? 2 minutes. Maybe less. Get out of there. Not without the files. The transfer bar seemed frozen at 93%. Marcus's street instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to wait. Everything depended on getting this evidence. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Multiple sets, moving quickly. The transfer hit 98%. Marcus, Grace hissed. He's almost there. The door handle began to turn just as the transfer completed. Marcus yanked the drive free and dove behind a server bank. The door opened, and Harrison Wells strode in, flanked by 2 security guards. "Search everything," Wells ordered. "Someone accessed this room in the last 10 minutes. Find them." Marcus pressed himself flat against the server, feeling its heat through his coverall. The guards moved methodically through the room, checking each row. It was only a matter of time before they found him. A new alarm blared suddenly, this one accompanied by sprinklers activating throughout the building. Marcus silently thanked Grace for having a backup plan. In the confusion of water raining down on sensitive equipment, he slipped past the distracted guards and out the door. "Head for the northwest stairwell," Grace instructed through the comm. "It's clear all the way down." Marcus ran, no longer bothering to maintain his maintenance worker cover. Behind him, he heard Wells shouting orders. The stairwell door was just ahead. Pain exploded in his left shoulder, the impact spinning him into the wall. One of the guards had managed a shot despite the sprinklers. Marcus gritted his teeth and kept moving, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Blood soaked his coveralls, but the wound felt like a graze. "Marcus, what happened?" "I heard gunfire." "I'm hit, but moving. Meet at the backup point." He burst out of the stairwell into the underground parking garage, exactly where Grace had shown him on the blueprint. A dark sedan waited in the shadows, its engine already running. Marcus dove into the passenger seat as more shots rang out behind them. Grace accelerated smoothly up the ramp, her driving skilled but not so aggressive as to draw attention. In the side mirror, Marcus saw security vehicles scrambling to pursue, but Grace had planned for this too. As they exited the garage, a delivery truck perfectly timed its arrival to block the entrance. "Let me see the wound," Grace said once they were safely away, merging into regular traffic. "Just a graze. Keep driving." Grace pressed a button on the steering wheel. "Amy, status?" "Everything's quiet here," Amy's voice came through the car's speakers. "Piper's sleeping peacefully." Marcus felt some of his tension ease at the news. He pulled out the flash drive, now slightly wet from the sprinklers but undamaged. "Tell me this was worth getting shot for." "We'll know soon enough." Grace turned onto Lakeshore Drive, taking an indirect route back to the penthouse. "There's a first aid kit in the glove compartment. Try not to bleed on my seat." Despite the situation, Marcus found himself smiling slightly. Grace's calm efficiency reminded him of his mother, who had been a nurse. She never panicked in a crisis either. The wound was indeed just a graze, painful but not serious. Marcus cleaned and bandaged it as best he could while Grace drove. His street medical skills had gotten plenty of practice over the years. "Wells will know it was us," he said as Grace parked in a public garage several blocks from the penthouse. "They would walk the rest of the way, watching for tail." "Yes, but if we got what I think we did, it won't matter." Grace handed him a clean shirt to replace the bloodied coverall. "Once the board sees the evidence, Wells is finished." They walked back to the penthouse, taking a circuitous route, both scanning constantly for surveillance. Marcus's shoulder throbbed, but he pushed the pain aside. He'd survived worse on the streets. Amy met them at the door, Piper in her arm. The baby was awake but quiet, her dark eyes taking in everything. The moment she saw Marcus, she reached for him with tiny hands. "She's been fussy," Amy reported. "Wouldn't settle until just now." Marcus took Piper carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder. The baby immediately snuggled against his chest, her familiar weight grounding him after the chaos of the night. Grace was already at her laptop, downloading the contents of the flash drive. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she sorted through the file. Marcus paced slowly with Piper, humming softly like he'd seen Amy do earlier. "Got it," Grace said after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. "Emails, financial records, everything. Wells hired the men who killed James and Lisa. He was planning to use Piper's DNA to gain control of the empathy engine, then make her death look like a kidnapping gone wrong." Marcus held Piper tighter, feeling a surge of protective rage. "Send it to the board." "Already done." "And to the police, FBI, and every major news outlet." Grace's smile was fierce. "Wells is finished. By morning, he'll be arrested, and everyone will know what he did." Amy hugged Grace. "I'll head to the office, make sure the board gets everything before the emergency meeting." After Amy left, Grace came over to where Marcus stood with Piper. "How's the shoulder?" "I'll live." He looked down at Piper, now sleeping peacefully against. "What happens now?" "Now we wait. The evidence is overwhelming. Wells will be arrested, and the company will be held in trust until Piper's old enough. Grace touched Piper's cheek gently. She'll be safe. Marcus knew he should feel relieved, but something felt unfinished. What about the men who chased us earlier? The ones who left her to die in that alley? The evidence implicates them too. They'll be arrested along with Wells. Grace studied his face. But that's not really what you're asking, is it? Marcus remained silent, not sure how to express what he was feeling. On the streets, relationships were temporary. Attachments were dangerous. But holding Piper, knowing she was safe but also knowing he would have to let her go, made his chest ache worse than his wounded shoulder. She needs a family, Grace said softly. A real home, stability, love. She has that with you. She has it with us. Grace's voice was firm. Marcus, I meant what I said before. She needs more than just me. She needs someone who would take a bullet to protect her. Someone who can teach her that family isn't about blood or money or status. Marcus looked at her sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying that when this is all over, when Wells is in jail and things settle down, I'm going to petition for custody of Piper, and I want you to be part of that custody agreement. The offer stunned him. I'm homeless. No job, no education past high school. All things that can be fixed. Grace touched his uninjured shoulder. What can't be fixed is finding someone who loves her the way you do. Someone who would risk everything to keep making the little snuffling sound he already recognized as her about to wake up hungry. Without thinking, he shifted her to a more comfortable position and reached for the prepared bottle on the counter. See? Grace smiled. You're already more of a parent than most people with all the right paperwork. Marcus fed Piper in silence. Considering Grace's words, the idea was terrifying. He'd spent so long surviving, avoiding connections, staying invisible. But looking down at Piper, he realized she had already changed everything. Maybe it was time to learn how to live instead of just survive. I don't know how to be part of a real family anymore, he admitted quietly. Neither do I, Grace replied. But maybe we can figure it out together. For her, Piper finished her bottle and gave him her first real smile. In that moment, Marcus knew his decision was already made. Some things were worth the risk of becoming visible again. Morning brought news of Harrison Wells' arrest, plastered across every major network. Grace watched the coverage from her laptop, while Marcus tended to Piper. The evidence they'd stolen had done its job, triggering an immediate police response. Video showed Wells being led from his mansion in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage. The board meeting is canceled, Amy reported via video call. They're calling an emergency session instead to address the leadership vacuum. Grace, they want you there. Marcus looked up from changing Piper's diaper. Is it safe? Wells is in custody, along with his primary mercenaries, Grace replied. But there could be others we don't know about. We should stay here until we're sure. The decision was made for them when Grace's phone rang. The caller ID showed the FBI field office. After a brief conversation, Grace's expression turned serious. They want statements from both of us, today, and they need to confirm Piper's identity. Marcus instinctively held Piper closer. Number! Marcus, the system never protected me. Why should I trust it to protect her? Grace sat beside him on the couch. Because this time she has us, both of us. We do this right, legal and proper, and no one can ever take her away. Marcus looked down at Piper, who was attempting to grab his nose with her tiny fingers. The past few days had changed everything he thought he knew about survival. Maybe it was time to change his views on trust as well. Fine, but we go together, and she stays with one of us at all time. The FBI field office occupied several floors of a downtown federal building. Marcus felt exposed in the borrowed business casual clothes Grace had provided, but she insisted they needed to look respectable. His shoulder wound had been properly treated by a doctor Grace trusted, and the clean bandage was hidden under his shirt. Special Agent Rivera met them in a private conference room, her manner professional but gentle when she saw Piper. A forensics team took DNA samples with minimal fuss, confirming what they already knew. Piper was indeed James and Lisa Chen's daughter. We'll need to go through everything, Rivera explained. How you found her, what led you to suspect Wells, all of it. Marcus told his part first, starting with that cold night behind Chen's convenience store. He left out certain details about his street contacts and methods, but otherwise told the truth. Grace followed with her side, explaining her suspicions about Wells and her search for Piper. The evidence you obtained, Rivera said carefully, was not exactly legal. Neither was murdering my brother and sister-in-law, Grace replied coldly. Rivera nodded. Given the circumstances and the fact that your actions saved a child's life, the U.S. attorney is declining to pursue any charges related to the data theft. Your testimony against Wells is more valuable. Relief washed over Marcus, though he tried not to show it. A criminal record would have complicated Grace's custody petition. What happens now? He asked. Wells will be arraigned tomorrow. Given the evidence, he's unlikely to get bail. His associates are already cooperating, confirming everything. Rivera closed her notebook. Piper's safety is our primary concern. We'll need to discuss protective arrangement. She stays with us, Grace said firmly. Miss Chen, you're her closest living relative. Under normal circumstances, temporary custody would naturally go to you. Rivera glanced at Marcus. But your proposed arrangement is unusual. My brother built his company on thinking differently, Grace replied. On seeing value where others didn't. Marcus saved Piper's life. He's proven himself more family than most blood relatives would be. Rivera looked between them thoughtfully. I'll speak to family services. Your resources and Mr. Williams's demonstrated commitment to the child's safety work in your favor. But there will need to be conditions. The conditions turned out to be extensive. Marcus would need to complete his GED, maintain stable employment, and attend parenting classes. Grace would be primary custodian, but Marcus would have legally protected visitation rights with the possibility of shared custody after meeting certain requirements. I can help with the education and employment parts, Grace told him as they left the federal building. The company's educational assistance program is part of my benefits package. Marcus adjusted Piper in his arms, buying time to process everything. Why are you doing all this? Because you were ready to die to protect her. Because she smiles every time she sees you. Because everyone deserves a chance at a real family. Grace smiled. Take your pick. They returned to the penthouse to find Amy waiting with news from the emergency board meeting. They want Grace to take over as interim CEO until Piper's old enough. No, Grace said immediately. Hear me out. The company needs stability. The shareholders need reassurance. Who better than James's sister, Piper's guardian, to protect both the company and his legacy? Marcus watched Grace pace the room, her mind clearly racing. She's right, he said quietly. You can protect everything James built. Make sure it's there for Piper when she's ready. Grace stopped pacing. It would mean long hours. Corporate politics, everything I hate. So hire good people to handle that stuff. Focus on what matters. Marcus gestured to the city visible through the window. Your brother wanted to change the world. Now you can make sure that happens the right way. Piper chose that moment to squeal happily, reaching for Grace. They all laughed, tension broken by baby giggles. Speaking of good people, Grace said, taking Piper. How would you feel about a real job, Marcus? The company's security division needs an overhaul after this mess. Someone with practical experience in finding weaknesses and staying invisible. Marcus stared at her. You want to hire me? Eventually, once you complete the GED and some security certification. In the meantime, you can intern, learn the business side. She bounced Piper gently. The hours would let you attend night classes, and the pay would help you find a proper apartment. It was overwhelming. 24 hours ago, he'd been planning a dangerous heist. Now he was being offered a future he'd never imagined possible. I don't know anything about corporate security. You know more than you think. You got past some of the best systems money can buy. Grace's expression turned serious. I'm not offering charity, Marcus. I'm offering opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. Marcus thought about his years on the street, all the skills he'd learned just to survive, finding weak points, staying unnoticed, thinking 3 steps ahead. Maybe those same skills could build a future instead of just getting through another day. Okay, he said, but I do it right. Everything legal. Everything earned. I wouldn't have it any other way. Grace handed Piper back to him. Now, we should discuss living arrangements until you find an apartment. The penthouse has plenty of space. Marcus started to protest, but Grace held up a hand. Before you argue about independence, think about Piper. Having both her guardians close by during this transition would be good for her. Once things settle down, you can find your own place nearby. Looking down at Piper's trusting face, Marcus felt his objections fade. She'd already torn down most of his walls. What was one more? Just until I find an apartment, he agreed. Amy, who had been quietly watching this exchange, smiled. I'll have my real estate friend start looking. In the meantime, that spare bedroom needs a crib. As the women discussed furniture orders and baby supplies, Marcus walked Piper to the window. The city spread out below them, the same streets where he'd learned to survive now offering a different kind of future. Big changes coming, little one, he whispered. Piper grabbed his finger, squeezing with surprising strength, but we'll figure it out together. Grace's phone rang at 3 in the morning, jolting her awake. Marcus was already up, pacing the penthouse living room with a fussy Piper. The past week had settled into an unexpected rhythm, with Marcus handling most night duties since his years on the streets had trained him to wake at the slightest sound. The call was from the security team at Grace's house. There had been a fire. The initial investigation suggested arson, and everything inside was destroyed, including all her research on wells and the evidence backups they'd kept there. Pack a bag, Grace told Marcus after hanging up. We need to move. The bug-out bag he'd insisted on preparing within easy reach. Wells? Has to be. He must have contingencies we didn't know about. Grace grabbed her laptop and the secure drives containing their evidence copies. The police are heading to my house now, but we can't risk staying here. The safe house in Lincoln Park? Too obvious. He'll know about all my property. Grace hesitated. We need somewhere he'd never think to look. Marcus shifted Piper to one arm while zipping the baby bag. I know a place. but you're not going to like it." The abandoned building looked worse than Grace remembered from the blueprints Marcus had shown her. Water damage stained the walls, and most windows were boarded up. But Marcus moved through the darkness confidently, leading them to a service elevator he'd manually restored. "Home sweet home," he said, as they entered what had once been a luxury apartment. The space was sparse but surprisingly clean. A mattress lay in one corner, surrounded by neatly organized supplies. "It's not much, but it's secure. I've been maintaining it as a backup for 2 years." Grace surveyed the room, noting the multiple escape routes Marcus had pointed out. "How many places like this do you have?" "Enough." He set Piper's portable crib up with practiced efficiency. "No one comes here. Even other homeless people think it's too unstable to risk." "But it's actually sound? I reinforce the important areas myself. The dangerous appearance is intentional." Marcus checked his phone. A new secure model Grace had provided. "Amy says the police are at your house. The fire department contained the blaze, but everything inside is gone." Grace sank onto a makeshift chair, exhaustion hitting her. "All my photos of James, our parents, everything." Marcus touched her shoulder briefly before returning to Piper. The gesture was awkward but sincere, and Grace found herself grateful for his quiet support. "We should check the news," she said, pulling out her laptop. Her FBI contact had warned her to watch for any suspicious media coverage. The morning headlines confirmed their fears. Someone had leaked selective evidence to suggest Grace and Marcus had framed Wells, using their control of company servers to plant false data. The story was thin, but it was enough to create doubt. "They're trying to control the narrative," Grace said, scanning the article. "Make us look like the criminals so anything we say about Wells loses credibility." "Will it work?" "Not long term. The FBI has the originals, and Wells's associates are still cooperating." Grace closed the laptop. "But short term? It could cause enough chaos for Wells's remaining allies to move against us." Marcus laid Piper in her crib, the baby finally asleep after the disruption. "We need to find out who's helping him. He couldn't arrange this from jail." "I have a suspicion." Grace pulled up company files on her secure tablet. "Rebecca Chen. Your cousin?" "James's cousin, technically. She's on the board, and she never forgave James for passing her over for promotion 5 years ago." Grace showed Marcus a photo of an elegant woman in her 40s. "She's been pushing for a merger with Titan Industries for years." Marcus studied the photo. "The same Titan Industries that Wells used to work for." "Exactly. I thought it was just corporate politics. But what if it's more? What if the whole plan was about forcing a merger?" Grace started pacing, her mind raced. "Think about it. Wells steals the empathy engine technology, stages it to look like corporate espionage gone wrong. Piper's death would have destabilized the company, making it vulnerable to a takeover," Marcus finished, "and Rebecca would have supported the merger, while getting revenge on James and taking control of her share of the company." Grace grabbed her phone. "We need to." The explosion downstairs cut her off, the blast shaking the entire building. Marcus moved instantly, grabbing Piper while pushing Grace toward their predetermined escape route. "They found us," he said unnecessarily. "Service stairs to the roof. Now." Grace grabbed the go bag containing their evidence and followed Marcus up the narrow stairwell. Below, they could hear multiple footsteps and voices. Professional hunters, not random thugs. The roof access door had been reinforced as part of Marcus's preparations, buying them precious seconds. Grace ran to the edge, looking for the fire escape Marcus had mentioned. "There," he pointed with his free arm. Piper secured against his chest and the carrier they'd never been more grateful for. "The next building is close enough to jump if we use the maintenance platform." Grace looked at the gap between buildings, her heart racing. "That's at least 10 feet. 8 feet, 2 inches. I measured. Marcus shifted Piper's carrier to his back. "I'll go first, then help you across." The door behind them shuddered as someone tried to break through. Grace pushed an abandoned air conditioning unit against it, but it wouldn't hold long. Marcus backed up several steps, then ran forward. He cleared the gap with surprising grace, landing solidly on the opposite roof. Piper, amazingly, didn't even cry. "Your turn," he called softly. "Don't think about the height. Just run and jump. I'll catch you." Grace had never considered herself athletic, but fear and adrenaline were powerful motivators. She copied Marcus's movements, pushing off hard from the edge of the platform. For a moment she was airborne, certain she wouldn't make it. Then Marcus's strong hands gripped her arms, pulling her to safety. The door on the other roof finally burst open. Grace and Marcus were already moving, making their way down through the second building. They emerged into an alley just as more explosions rocked the abandoned building. "They're destroying the evidence," Grace said as they hurried away from the scene, "making it look like a gas leak or structural collapse. Good thing we weren't actually sleeping there." Marcus adjusted Piper's carrier. "I swept it for surveillance when I first showed you the blueprints. Found 3 different types of bugs. Figured someone would try to use it against us eventually. Grace almost smiled despite the situation. You let them think they were tracking. Rule 1 of living on the streets. Always let them underestimate you. Marcus led them through a complex series of alleys and side streets. We've got maybe an hour before they realize we weren't in the building. Where are we going? Somewhere even I don't use, unless it's an absolute emergency. He glanced at her. How do you feel about abandoned subway tunnels? Grace thought about her comfortable house, now a burned-out shell, about the penthouse they'd fled, about all the safe, clean places that were no longer safe. Lead the way. Marcus navigated the city's underbelly with the same confidence he'd shown in corporate servers and security systems. Grace followed, trying to memorize the route while keeping watch for pursuers. Piper, incredibly, had fallen back asleep, apparently soothed by the movement. Almost there, Marcus said after what felt like hours. They emerged from the tunnel system into what looked like an old maintenance station. The space was small but dry, with multiple exit routes. Most importantly, it was nearly impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. I stocked some supplies down here last year, Marcus explained, pulling blankets and non-perishable food from a hidden compartment. Never needed it until now. Grace set up Piper's portable crib while Marcus did a security sweep. The baby hadn't made a sound during their entire escape, as if she somehow understood the need for silence. We can't keep running, Grace said once they were settled. Sooner or later they'll find us. I know. Marcus sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool underground space. But we need proof of Rebecca's involvement before we surf it. Otherwise, it's just our word against hers. Grace pulled out her tablet, grateful for the backup battery. Then let's find it. Rebecca must have communicated with Wells somehow. Even careful people make mistakes. They spent the next few hours combing through data, looking for any connection between Rebecca Chen and Harrison Wells. It was slow work in the dim light of the maintenance station, but neither of them could sleep anyway. Here, Grace said finally, an email chain from 6 months ago. Rebecca met with representatives from Titan Industries the same day. Wells had a mysterious gap in his calendar. That's not a no, but it's a start. Grace kept digging. Look at these financial transfers. Small amounts, but regular, all going to an offshore account. And here, travel records showing Rebecca in the same cities as Wells, from multiple tech conferences. Marcus leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. Can you trace the offshore account? Not directly, but Grace pulled up another file. The account matches a pattern our forensic accountants found when investigating Wells's mercenary payments. Same bank, same transfer method. She was paying them too, helping Wells pay them at least. Grace started cross-referencing dates. The transfers increased right before James and Lisa died. Piper whimpered in her sleep, drawing both their attention. Marcus checked on her automatically, his gentle touch calming her back to sleep. We need more, he said, returning to Grace's side. Something that directly links her to Wells's plans back into the data. The maintenance station fell quiet except for the distant rumble of subway train and the soft sound of Piper's breathing. 2 days in the maintenance station had taught Grace more about survival than her entire privileged life before. She watched Marcus move through the space, teaching her his methods. How to listen for approaching footsteps over the subway noise, how to cache supplies in multiple locations, how to become invisible when necessary. The trick is confidence, he explained, while showing her how to walk through maintenance tunnels without drawing attention. Most people see what they expect to see, wear the right clothes, carry the right tools, act like you belong. They had acquired maintenance worker uniforms from one of Marcus's street contacts, complete with authentic-looking ID badges. Grace practiced walking with the right mix of purpose and boredom, mimicking the workers they occasionally glimpsed through ventilation grates. Piper adapted to their underground life with surprising ease. The constant white noise of distant trains seemed to soothe her, and Marcus had created a cozy space in their hideout that almost felt like a normal nursery. Almost. We need to move soon, Marcus said as they reviewed their evidence against Rebecca. We can't keep Piper down here much longer. Grace nodded, thinking of the dwindling baby supply. They had enough formula for maybe 2 more days, and their own food wouldn't last much longer. The data trail is solid, she said, showing him her latest finding. Rebecca met with Titan Industries executives 12 times in the past year. Each meeting was followed by large transfers to that offshore account. And the account links to the mercenaries? Definitively. I found emails between Wells and the account manager discussing payment schedule. Grace pulled up another document. But this is the smoking gun. A draft merger agreement dated 3 months ago with terms heavily favoring Rebecca and Wells. Marcus studied the document. His crash course in corporate documentation over the past week had improved his understanding significantly. They planned this from the start. The merger would have given them control of the empathy engine while appearing completely legitimate. Grace clenched her fists. They killed my brother for a business deal. No, Marcus corrected quietly. They killed him for power, the kind of power his technology could give them. Grace was about to respond when their perimeter alarm activated. A simple system of fishing line and tin cans, but effective in the quiet tunnels. Someone was approaching. Marcus moved silently to Piper's makeshift crib, gathering her and their essential supplies with practiced efficiency. Grace quickly powered down her devices, leaving no electronic signature to trace. They had rehearsed this evacuation multiple times. Grace took Piper while Marcus scouted their primary escape route. The maintenance tunnels formed a complex maze, but Marcus had memorized the safe paths. 2 groups, he whispered when he returned. Professional search pattern. Primary route is compromised. Secondary, also what? They learned from last time. Marcus checked his phone, one of several burners they'd acquired. Amy's message just came through. Rebecca's people accessed the building blueprints an hour ago. Grace adjusted Piper in her carrier. How did they find us? Probably tracked our supply runs. I thought I was being careful enough. Marcus's expression hardened. We need to split up. Number? Grace, listen. They're expecting us to stay together. You take Piper through the south tunnel. I'll create a distraction. Draw them north. That's too dangerous. I survived on these streets for 2 years. Trust me to survive a few more hours. Marcus checked their remaining equipment. Take the evidence. Get it to the FBI. I'll meet you at the backup location once I lose them. Grace wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Together, they were slower, more visible, and Piper's safety had to come first. 4 hours, she said firmly. If you're not at the backup location by then, I'm coming back for you. Marcus nodded, already preparing for his distraction. Grace had seen him gather supplies, but now she watched him transform. His posture changed, becoming more aggressive. The street survivor, emerging fully. Remember what I taught you, he said, checking Piper one last time. Stay invisible. Trust your instincts. If anything feels wrong, run the other way, Grace finished. I remember. Marcus touched Piper's cheek gently, then met Grace's eyes. 4 hours. He moved toward the north tunnel, and Grace forced herself to turn south. The maintenance worker disguise felt heavier now, but she remembered Marcus's lessons. Confidence, purpose, belong. The south tunnel was dark, except for emergency lighting. Grace moved carefully, testing each step as Marcus had taught her. Piper stayed remarkably quiet, perhaps sensing the tension. Grace heard the commotion start behind her, Marcus's distraction drawing attention north. She picked up her pace, recognizing the markers they'd memorized. 3 tunnels to the emergency exit. 2 tunnels. 1. The exit led to a service door near Monroe Street Station. Grace emerged into early morning light, blinking at the sudden brightness. She adjusted her uniform, checked that Piper was completely covered, and walked purposefully toward the predetermined meeting point. 4 blocks and 2 buses later, she reached the small law office where Amy worked. A back entrance led to a private conference room where Amy was waiting. Thank God, Amy said, hugging her carefully around Piper. The FBI is on their way. Where's Marcus? Grace checked her phone. 3 hours until the meeting deadline, creating a diversion. He'll be here. Amy didn't look convinced, but knew better than to argue. She helped Grace clean up and change into professional clothes she'd brought. Piper was changed and fed, settling easily into the car seat Amy had ready. Rebecca's getting nervous, Amy reported while they waited. She called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon, probably trying to push through the merger before everything falls apart. Grace checked the time again. 2 hours left. Let her. The evidence is clear now, once the FBI has it. The door opened, making them both jump, but it was just the agents they'd been working with. Rivera looked relieved to see them. Miss Chen, we need to move quickly. Our warrant for Rebecca's arrest is ready, but we have to catch her before she leaves the country. Where's Mr. Williams? Coming, Grace said, with more confidence than she felt. We split up to avoid pursuit. He'll be here. Rivera nodded, already reviewing the new evidence on Grace's tablet. Her eyebrows rose as she read. This is comprehensive. Financial records, meeting minutes, draft contracts. How did you get all this? Marcus taught me to think like someone with everything to lose, Grace replied. To look for the small mistakes people make when they think they're too smart to get caught. The door burst open again. This time it was Marcus, breathing hard but uninjured. Grace felt relief wash over her. They're coming, he said without preamble. Rebecca's personal security. They tracked me here. Rivera immediately began issuing orders through her radio. How many? At least 6, maybe more. Professional. Marcus moved to check on Piper. We need to move. The building is secured, Rivera assured them. But you're right, we should get you all to a safe location before we move on Rebecca. Grace started gathering their things, but Marcus stopped her. Number, we finish this now, Marcus. They'll keep coming unless we end it today. He met Rivera's eyes. You have what you need to arrest Rebecca? Yes. But then let us help. She'll be more careless if she thinks she has us cornered. Use that. Rivera studied him thoughtfully. You have experience with tactical operations? 2 years of staying alive on Chicago Street, plus a week of corporate espionage. Marcus's smile was grim. I know how to make people see what they expect to see. Grace understood where he was going. A trap. Let Rebecca think she has us desperate and running. While you move in behind her, Marcus finished. Rivera consulted with her team briefly. It's risky, but it could work. What did you have in mind? Marcus outlined his plan quickly. Grace listened with growing admiration. He'd taken everything he'd learned about corporate security and combined it with his street survival skills, creating something unique. We'll need to move fast, he concluded, before Rebecca realizes her security team lost us. Rivera nodded sharply. My team will be in position in 30 minutes. Are you sure about this? Marcus looked at Piper, now sleeping peacefully in her car seat. Some things are worth the risk. Grace touched his arm. We do this together. Together, he agreed. One last time we let them underestimate us. They spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the plan. Amy would take Piper to a secure FBI location. Grace and Marcus would play their parts, drawing Rebecca into position. Rivera's team would handle the rest. As they prepared to leave, Grace watched Marcus check his equipment one last time. The street survivor was still there, but now tempered with something else. Purpose, family. Marcus nodded, his expression determined, ready to stop running. The Chen Technologies lobby buzzed with morning activity as Grace strode through the main entrance. She wore her most expensive suit, projecting confidence and authority despite having spent the last 2 days in maintenance tunnels. The security guards nodded respectfully, their systems recognizing her credentials. Marcus entered separately through the loading dock, wearing maintenance coveralls and carrying a toolbox. The same disguise that had gotten him into the server room now let him move freely through the building's service areas. No one looked twice at maintenance workers during a crisis. Rebecca is in the executive conference room, Amy reported through their secure earpieces. Full board meeting in progress. She's making her move for the merger. Grace stepped into the executive elevator, swiping her access card. Security positions? 2 teams sweeping the lower floors, Marcus replied, his voice barely a whisper. 4 more in stairwells. They're expecting us to try something. Good. Grace checked her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls, adjusting her appearance one last time. Agent Rivera? Teams in position, the FBI agent confirmed. Waiting for your signal. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. Grace moved purposefully toward the conference room. Noting the subtle presence of Rebecca's private security, they watched her approach but didn't interfere. Everything according to plan. Through the glass walls, Grace could see Rebecca standing at the head of the conference table, presenting something on the large screen. The other board members looked concerned, exactly as they should when discussing a hostile merger. Grace pushed open the conference room doors without ceremony. Every head turned toward her, expressions ranging from shock to relief to carefully concealed anger. I believe you're discussing my company's future, Grace said calmly. I should be part of that conversation. Rebecca recovered quickly, her smile professionally cold. Grace, we feared something had happened to you after the tragic fire at your home. I'm sure you were very concerned. Grace moved to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. Please, continue. You were explaining why selling to Titan Industries is our only option? The company is unstable, Rebecca replied smoothly. The scandal with Harrison Wells, the missing technical documentation, the uncertain status of James's final project. The shareholders are nervous. Nervous enough to accept a merger that gives control to the same company Wells used to work for? A ripple of murmurs ran through the board member. Rebecca's smile tightened slightly. Wells's previous employment is irrelevant. Titan Industries has the resources and expertise to stabilize Chen Technologies during this crisis. A crisis you helped create. Grace nodded to Amy, who had slipped into the room. Screens around the conference room came alive with financial records and email. Rebecca's composure cracked for just a moment. What is this? Evidence. Grace stood, commanding the room's attention. Of your meetings with Titan executives, of payments to the mercenaries Wells hired, of a carefully planned hostile takeover disguised as a merger. Ridiculous. Rebecca's hand moved toward her phone. These documents are clearly fabricated, like the evidence you tried to plant framing me and Marcus Williams. Grace walked slowly around the table. Your mistake was underestimating him. Street survivors notice details that corporate executives miss. Rebecca pressed a button on her phone, summoning her security team. Right on schedule. Miss Chen, one of the guards said from the doorway. Please come with us. Grace smiled. No, I don't think I will. The next few moments happened in rapid succession. The guard reached for his weapon just as the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting the room in an eerie blue glow. Marcus's voice came through Grace's earpiece. Service elevator disabled. Stairwell teams contained. Rebecca's security moved to surround her, but the board members were already moving away, creating chaos in the confined space. Through the glass walls, Grace could see FBI agents emerging from every access point. Rebecca Chen, Rivera's voice rang out clearly. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corporate espionage, and attempted kidnapping. Rebecca's composure finally shattered. She grabbed her laptop and ran for her private office. Grace smiled, another part of the plan falling into place. The private office had its own elevator, a secure line directly to the underground parking garage. Rebecca would naturally head there, thinking it was her best escape route. "She's moving," Grace reported, watching through the glass as Rebecca barricaded herself in her office. "Marcus, ready." Rebecca's private elevator opened, revealing Marcus in his maintenance uniform. Before she could react, he stepped out and smoothly disabled the elevator controls with a device Grace didn't quite understand. "Going down?" he asked mildly. Rebecca backed away, looking desperately for another escape route. But FBI agents were already entering through her office's other door. "It's over," Grace said from the doorway. "The evidence is already with the Justice Department. Wells is cooperating to save himself. Even Titan Industries is distancing themselves from the scandal." Rivera moved to handcuff Rebecca, reciting her rights. The board members watched from the conference room, their expressions a mix of shock and comprehension as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. "The company's reputation," Rebecca spat as she was led away. "You've destroyed everything James built." "No," Grace replied firmly. "I've protected it. Protected his legacy, his daughter, and his vision for changing the world." As the FBI led Rebecca away, Grace felt Marcus step up beside her. In their earpieces, they could hear Amy confirming that Piper was safe and happy at the secure location. "Good work with the elevator control," Grace said quietly. "Simple, really. Most secure systems have maintenance override. People always forget about the maintenance worker." Marcus watched the FBI gathering evidence from Rebecca's office. "Think it's really over?" "This part is." Grace turned to face the board members who were looking to her for direction. "Now we rebuild. Make the company what James always wanted it to be." Marcus nodded, understanding her unspoken message. It was time for him to disappear back into the maintenance corridor, maintaining their cover story a little longer. "Meet you at home?" he asked softly. Grace smiled at the way he said home, like it was still surprising to have one. "1 hour. I need to reassure the board and coordinate with Rivera's team." The board meeting that followed was long but productive. Grace presented her evidence methodically, explaining how Rebecca and Wells had conspired to steal both the company and the empathy engine technology. The board members, already shaken by Wells's arrest, were horrified by the depth of the conspiracy. "The company stays independent," Grace concluded. "We have the resources, the talent, and most importantly, the vision. James wanted to change the world for the better. That's exactly what we're going to do." The vote was unanimous. Grace would remain as CEO, with a mandate to rebuild the company's reputation and continue James's work. The merger was rejected, and a press release was drafted explaining recent events in terms that would reassure shareholders without causing panic. Through it all, Grace kept one eye on her phone, monitoring updates from Amy about Piper. Their daughter, she corrected herself mentally, was apparently fascinated by the FBI agents assigned to protect her. Finally, as the sun was setting over Chicago, Grace left Chen Technology and headed to their temporary home, a safe house provided by the FBI, but already feeling more like home than her burned mansion ever had. Marcus and Piper were waiting in the living room, both freshly bathed and changed into clean clothes. The sight of them together, Marcus reading a board book while Piper tried to grab his nose, made Grace's throat tight with emotion. "Rivera called," Marcus said without looking up. "Rebecca's lawyers are already talking plea deal. They have enough to put her away for decades." Grace sat beside them on the couch, letting Piper grab her finger. "The board voted to keep the company independent. We'll announce everything tomorrow. And the empathy engine stays in development, but with new safeguards. Multiple layers of authentication, not just genetic." Grace leaned back, finally allowing herself to relax. "James wanted it to help people. That's what it's going to do." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What about us? What about us?" "The board. They'll have questions about your choice of head of security, about custody arrangements that include a former homeless man." Grace had expected this concern. "The board trusts my judgment, and once they see your security proposals, they'll understand why." As for Piper, she smiled at their daughter. "Family is family, no matter how it comes together." The Chen Technologies helipad offered a clear view of Chicago's skyline, the morning sun glinting off countless windows. Marcus watched from the shadows of the stairwell access as Harrison Wells was led toward the waiting helicopter in handcuffs. The former executive's face was tight, with barely Rivera's voice came through Marcus's earpiece. "Package en route to federal detention." Marcus maintained his position, scanning for any sign of trouble. The past week had proven that Wells still had resources they hadn't uncovered. Until the helicopter cleared Chicago airspace, nothing was certain. "Movement on the north building," Marcus reported, catching a glint of metal through his binocular. "Confirmed." One of Rivera's snipers responded. "Just building maintenance. They're certified." Marcus smiled slightly, appreciating the irony. A few months ago, he'd used the same maintenance worker cover to infiltrate this building. Now he was helping secure it against similar threats. The helicopter lifted off smoothly, banking toward the federal courthouse, where Wells would face additional charges related to Rebecca's testimony. Marcus watched it disappear into the morning sky before activating his radio. "Transport clear. Resuming normal operation." Grace's voice replied immediately. "Good. Meeting in my office in 10 minutes. Bring the updated security protocols." Marcus took the executive elevator, still not entirely comfortable with his new access privileges. His maintenance uniform had been replaced by a tailored suit, though he kept a set of coveralls in his office. Some habits were worth maintaining. He found Grace in her office, Piper sleeping peacefully in a bassinet near the desk. The sight of their daughter in this space always struck him, a reminder of how much had changed in such a short time. Wells looked nervous, Grace said without looking up from her tablet. More than at the previous hearing. He should be. Marcus set his security report on her desk. Rebecca's testimony opened up international charges. The Titan Industries connection has authorities in 3 countries interested. Grace nodded, finally meeting his eye. "Any word on the last mercenary team?" "FBI tracked them to Montreal. Canadian authorities are moving in tonight." Marcus checked his phone, confirming the latest updates. After that, all known threats will be contained. Known threats being the key phrase. Grace stood, moving to check on Piper. "We need to discuss the new security system. The board approved your budget proposal." Marcus pulled up the blueprints on the office's main screen. 3 layers of physical security, plus enhanced cyber protection. No more relying solely on genetic authentication. And the maintenance tunnels, mapped, secured, and monitored. But I left a few secret routes, just in case. Grace smiled, understanding his need for backup plans. "Trust but verify?" Something like that. Marcus joined her at Piper's bassinet. The new protocols include rotating security team, regular penetration testing, and mandatory background checks for all maintenance contractors, including a few of your old street contacts? "Reformed street contacts," Marcus corrected. "People who deserve a second chance, just like I got." Grace touched his arm gently. "You earned that chance several times over." Their conversation was interrupted by Piper stirring in her bassinet. Marcus reached for her automatically, his movements confident after months of practice. The baby settled against his chest, grabbing his tie with surprising strength. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Grace said, gathering her material. "You'll handle security?" "Already done. Amy's team swept the room this morning. All attendees have been vetted." Marcus adjusted Piper to a more comfortable position. "Want me to take her to the nursery?" The company daycare had been one of Grace's first initiatives as CEO. Located 2 floors down, it featured state-of-the-art security and highly trained staff, but they both preferred keeping Piper close when possible. "She can stay," Grace decided. "The board should see what we're really protecting." The board meeting went smoothly, with Marcus standing quietly at the back of the room, Piper still contentedly sleeping against his chest. He listened as Grace outlined the company's recovery from the Wells and Rebecca scandal, noting with pride how she emphasized security improvement. "Our new protocols have already prevented 3 attempted breaches," Grace reported, "thanks to our head of security's unique perspective on system vulnerabilities." Several board members glanced at Marcus, their expressions ranging from curiosity to lingering skepticism. He met their gazes calmly, projecting the same confidence he'd used to survive on the streets. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent message from Rivera. Marcus read it on his phone, his body tensing instinctively. "Grace," he said quietly, "we need to move now." She read his tone instantly. Years of trust overriding protocol. Meeting adjourned. Security situation requires immediate attention. The board members were still gathering their things when Marcus's team swept in, securing the room. Through the windows they could see helicopter approaching, unauthorized and flying too low. "Wells's last play?" Marcus said as they moved quickly toward the secure elevator. His team in Montreal was a diversion. Grace was already coordinating with building security through her tablet. "How many?" Thermal imaging shows 4 in the helicopter, probably more coming up through the building. Marcus shifted Piper to a more protected position. "They're not here to negotiate." The elevator opened into the secure sublevel Grace had added during the building renovation. Marcus had insisted on multiple escape routes, including one that connected to his old maintenance tunnel. "Rivera's team is 8 minutes out," Grace reported, as they hurried through reinforced corridor. "FBI has air support incoming." Above them, they could hear the helicopter landing on the roof. Marcus led them to a hidden door disguised as a utility panel. Beyond it lay the tunnel system he'd once called home. "Almost there," he assured Piper, who was starting to fuss. "Just a little longer, little one." They were halfway to the first intersection when the tunnel behind them filled with footsteps. Marcus pushed Grace toward a maintenance alcove, shielding Piper with his body. "Give us the child," a voice called out. "That's all we want." The genetic key to the empathy engine. Marcus felt Grace press something into his hand, a small taser, part of the security upgrades he'd insisted on. He passed Piper to her, making sure they were both hidden in the alcove. "Really?" he called back to their pursuers. "Still trying the same old plan?" "The engine's core programming requires Chen DNA," the voice replied. "Without it, everything Wells built is worthless." Marcus smiled in the darkness. "You really should have done better research." The lights went out suddenly, plunging the tunnel into total darkness. But Marcus knew these tunnels by touch, had memorized every pipe and conduit. In the confusion, he heard Grace slip away through the escape route they'd prepared. "The engine's genetic lock was changed months ago," Marcus said, his voice echoing off the walls. "Multiple authenticated users now, which you'd know if you had any real access to the company." The mercenaries fired blindly, their muzzle flashes destroying their night vision. Marcus moved silently through the darkness, using skills learned from years of avoiding street predators. "So, you're risking federal terrorism charges for nothing," he continued, drawing their attention away from Grace's direction. "Wells played you." Again, a burst of gunfire answered him, but he was already moving. The taser found its first target, then its second. In the darkness, their own people couldn't tell who was friend or foe. The tunnel filled with shouts and confusion. Marcus disabled 2 more mercenaries before Rivera's team breached from both ends, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness. "Clear," Rivera called out after a brief but intense exchange of fire. "All hostiles contained." Marcus keyed his radio. "Grace? Safe," she replied. "FBI has the helicopter team in custody. Piper's already asking for her bedtime story." Marcus felt the tension leave his body. He looked at the captured mercenary, now being processed by Rivera's team. "Wells never left federal custody," Rivera reported. "This was his backup team acting on old orders. His last play, like you said." Grace met them at the FBI command post, Piper reaching for Marcus the moment she saw him. He took her great breathed in her baby scent. "The board is secure," Grace reported, "though I think we can expect some interesting questions at the next meeting." "Let them ask." Marcus adjusted Piper's blanket. "Everything we did, all the systems we put in place, worked exactly as designed." Rivera joined them, holstering her weapon. "The mercenaries are already talking. Seems Wells had them on retainer, with orders to act if certain conditions were met." "And now?" Grace asked. "Now they're facing federal charges, and Wells will never see the outside of a prison." Rivera smiled tiredly. "I'd say your security system passed its stress test." Marcus looked down at Piper, who had fallen asleep despite all the excitement. "No more tests needed. Family is more important than understanding in her eyes. Let's go home." 1 month after Wells's final attempt to seize control of Chen Technology, Marcus stood in his new office, reviewing security footage from the previous night. The wall of monitors showed every angle of the building, from the underground parking garage to the rooftop helipad. No blind spots, no weaknesses, nothing like the vulnerabilities he'd once exploited. A soft knock at his door revealed Grace, carrying Piper. The baby had grown noticeably in the past months, her dark eyes now tracking everything with intense curiosity. "Board meeting in 10 minutes, Grace reminded him. "Ready to present the final security assessment?" Marcus nodded, gathering his material. The past month had been dedicated to closing every possible security gap, implementing systems that combined corporate protection with his street-learned instincts. "The last of Wells's mercenaries was sentenced yesterday," he reported as they walked toward the conference room. "Maximum security, no possibility of parole. And Rebecca, still cooperating." Her testimony shut down 3 more corporate espionage operations Titan Industries was running. Marcus held the door for Grace, noting the subtle security features he'd installed. Reinforced hinges, bulletproof glass, biometric locks that looked decorative but weren't. The board members were already assembled, their attitudes toward Marcus notably different from those early skeptical days. Success, he'd learned, was the best answer to doubt. "Mr. Williams," the board chairman greeted him. "We're eager to hear your assessment." Marcus connected his tablet to the room's display system, the screens filled with security metrics, threat assessment, and response protocols. He'd learned to speak their language, translating street survival into corporate strategy. "The new security framework has 3 core components," he began. "Physical security, cyber protection, and human intelligence. Each layer works independently but communicates constantly." He walked them through the changes, explaining how the maintenance tunnel network had been converted into a secure emergency response system, how his street contacts now formed a legitimate intelligence network, monitoring threats before they reached the building. "Most importantly," he concluded, "we've eliminated single points of failure. No one person, not even the CEO, has complete access to critical systems. Everything requires multiple authentication." The chairman nodded approvingly. "And the empathy engine?" "Secure," Grace answered. "The genetic authentication system has been completely rebuilt. It now requires multiple approved users, with additional biometric and behavioral verification." Marcus brought up the final slides, showing security test results. "In the past month, We've prevented 12 attempted breaches. None made it past the first layer of security. The board's questions were technical, but approving. They'd come to respect the unique perspective Marcus brought to corporate security. Street smarts combined with formal training had proven more effective than either alone. After the meeting, Grace handed Piper to him. Take her to the park for lunch. Amy and I can handle the afternoon meetings. The small park near Chen Technologies had become their regular spot. Marcus sat on their usual bench, holding Piper while she watched the pigeons with fascination. A year ago, he'd avoided parks, seeing them only as places to sleep when shelters were full. Mr. Williams? He turned to see Sarah, the clinic nurse, who'd helped him save Piper that first night. She smiled at the baby, who was trying to grab Marcus's tie. I almost didn't recognize you, Sarah said, sitting beside them. The suit, the office, the security team, big changes. Marcus adjusted Piper's sun hat. Good changes. I can see that. Sarah watched a group of children playing nearby. The clinic misses you, though. You were always good with the scared ones, the runners. He'd been thinking about the clinic lately, about others trying to survive on the streets as he had. Grace and I have been discussing a new project, using company resources to help people transition off the streets. Job training, education, support service, like what you did for your security team? Marcus nodded. Most of his street contacts had transitioned into legitimate work, either with Chen Technologies or partner companies. Trust built over years of survival translated well into corporate loyalty. The board approved initial funding yesterday, he said. We're calling it the Second Chance Initiative. The clinic would be a perfect partner for medical service. Sarah's eyes lit up. Count me in. When do we start? They discussed possibilities until Piper started fussing for her lunch. Marcus fed her with practiced ease, remembering those first terrifying days of learning baby care while running for their lives. Back at the office, he found Grace in the middle of a video conference with international partners. The Empathy Engine project was moving forward, carefully controlled, but full of potential. James Chen's vision of technology that could truly understand and help people was becoming reality. How was the park? Grace asked after ending her call. Good. Ran into Sarah from the clinic. She's interested in the Second Chance project. Grace smiled. Of course she is. She saw your potential before anyone else did. Marcus settled Piper into her playpen near Grace's desk. She reminded me how far we've come. How much has changed? Having second thoughts? Number. Marcus watched Piper playing with her favorite stuffed elephant, just thinking about others out there. People who just need a chance, like I got. Grace touched his arm gently. Then we'll help them. It's what family does. Family. The word still felt new, but right. He had gone from avoiding connections to building them, from surviving to living, all because of a baby in a shoebox, and people who saw past his circumstances to his potential. The FBI sent over Wells's final statement, Grace said, changing subjects. He still claims the Empathy Engine was stolen from him, that James Chen just improved his original design. Marcus shook his head. He never understood what made it work. James built it to help people, to create real connections. Wells just saw power and control. Speaking of connections, Grace pulled up a calendar on her tablet. The adoption hearing is next week. Rivera and Amy are testifying about your role in protecting Piper. Sarah submitted a letter about that first night at the clinic. Marcus felt the familiar mix of anxiety and hope. The legal process of becoming Piper's official co-guardian had been complex, but worth every moment. The judge will see what we see, Grace assured him. A man who risked everything to protect a child he'd just found, who transitioned from survival to success without losing his compassion, who reminds everyone that family is about choices and actions, not just blood. Piper chose that moment to demand attention, her arms reaching up insistently. Marcus lifted her, breathing in her baby scent. She grabbed his tie as usual, tugging with surprising strength. She knows, Grace said softly. Babies always know who loves them, who makes them feel safe. Everything else is just paperwork. Marcus held his daughter, watching the city through the office window. The same streets that had taught him to survive now offered new lessons about living, about family, about turning past struggles into future strength. Time for her afternoon nap, he said, recognizing Piper's sleepy signals. Grace nodded, already focused on her next meeting. They had found their rhythm, balancing corporate leadership with family life. Different skills, but the same core principles: protection and care. In the nursery, 2 floors down, Marcus sat in the rocking chair they'd imported from Grace's temporary apartment. Piper fought sleep as usual, determined not to miss anything, but gradually her eyes closed, her grip on his tie relaxing. He looked at his sleeping daughter, marveling at how one moment of choice in a cold alley had changed everything. The street survivor was still there, his instincts now protecting something greater than himself. But he was more than that now. Security director, father, family. Through the nursery window, he could see his old haunts, the alleys and hideouts that had kept him alive. Soon, the Second Chance Initiative would help others find their way from those shadows into the light. But for now, He simply held his daughter, grateful for all the choices that had led to this moment. The courtroom felt smaller than Marcus had imagined. He sat beside Grace in his best suit, watching the judge review their adoption paperwork. Piper, dressed in a tiny formal dress Amy had insisted on buying, played contentedly in Grace's lap. Judge Martinez had a reputation for thoroughness in family court cases. She'd spent the morning questioning character witnesses, including Rivera, Amy, and Sarah. Each had told part of their story, from that first desperate night at the clinic to the final confrontation with Wells's mercenary. "Mr. William," the judge said finally, "please approach the bench." Marcus stood, straightening his tie. A year ago, he would have run from any interaction with the legal system. Now he walked forward confidently, knowing he had earned his place for an adoption case. Martinez noted, reviewing his file. No fixed address for 2 years, no formal employment history until recently, multiple citations for trespassing and vagrancy, though no formal charges. Yes, Your Honor. Yet in the past year, you've completed your GED, established a successful career in corporate security, and helped expose a major criminal conspiracy. She looked at him over her reading glasses. Quite a transformation. Marcus met her gaze steadily. Finding Piper transformed everything. She gave me a reason to be more than just a survivor. The judge nodded thoughtfully. The FBI speaks very highly of your actions during the Wells investigation. Agent Rivera says you demonstrated exceptional judgment under extreme pressure. I did what was necessary to keep Piper safe. Yes, about that. Martinez leaned forward. Walk me through that first night. You found an abandoned infant, clearly at risk. Most people would have called the police immediately. Why didn't you? Marcus had prepared for this question, but he chose to answer from the heart rather than rehearsed word. Because I grew up in the system, Your Honor. I know how it can fail children, even with the best intention. When I found Piper, something told me she needed protection more than she needed procedure. And now, do you still distrust the system? I trust people who prove themselves trustworthy, Marcus replied. Grace, the FBI, this court. I've learned that sometimes the system can work if the right people are involved. Martinez smiled slightly. Well said. She turned her attention to Grace. Miss Chen, your petition for joint custody is also on you. As Piper's aunt and current guardian, you could have simply hired Mr. Williams as security. Grace stood, holding Piper. Family isn't about convenience, Your Honor. Marcus has been Piper's protector since the night he found her. He's earned the right to be her father in name, as well as action. The judge reviewed more documents while Piper grabbed at the polished wood railing, fascinated by her reflection. Marcus watched his daughter, still amazed by how natural that word felt now. I have reviewed all the evidence, Martinez said finally, including the sealed FBI files about the attempts on Piper's life. It's clear that both petitioners have demonstrated extraordinary commitment to this child's welfare. She closed the file deliberately. Moreover, I've rarely seen such compelling testimony about a potential parent's character. The second chance initiative you've established, Mr. Williams, speaks volumes about your desire to help others find the same opportunities you receive. Marcus felt Grace's hand slip into his as the judge continued. Therefore, it is the finding of this court that the joint custody petition is approved. Mr. Williams will have equal legal status as Piper's guardian, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. Martinez smiled properly this time. Congratulations, you're officially a family. The small group gathered at Grace's penthouse afterward to celebrate. Amy had decorated with balloons and streamers, while Sarah brought cupcakes from the bakery near her clinic. Rivera came by briefly to offer congratulations before heading back to work. To family, Grace proposed a toast, lifting her glass of champagne in all its unexpected form. Marcus held Piper, who was more interested in grabbing at the streamers than understanding the significance of the day. But she seemed to sense the happiness around her, offering her new official smile to everyone. The board sent this, Amy said, handing over a large envelope. Inside was a formal letter confirming Marcus's promotion to Chief of Global Security, along with a significant budget increase for the Second Chance Initiative. They've come a long way from suspecting the homeless guy, Marcus observed, reading the letter. You've proven yourself many times over, Grace replied. The new security protocols you implemented are being adopted as industry standards. 3 other companies have already licensed our system. Sarah joined them, carrying fresh cupcakes. The clinic received the initiative's first grant today. We're expanding our overnight services, adding job training programs. Any promising candidates for security training? Marcus asked. He'd made a point of reviewing all initiative applications personally, looking for others with potential waiting to be discovered. 2, maybe 3. One reminds me of you, actually. Former military, fell on hard times, but still has that protective instinct. The party continued into the evening, but eventually their friends departed, leaving the new official family alone. Marcus stood by the window, holding a sleeping Piper, while Grace finished some work emails. What are you thinking about? She asked, joining them at the window. The night I found her, Marcus replied softly. How close I came to walking away. to staying invisible. Grace touched Piper's cheek gently. But you didn't. You chose to act, to protect, to care. Everything else grew from that choice. They stood together, watching the city lights twinkle below. The same streets that had once been Marcus's whole world now seemed smaller, less threatening. He had new territory to protect now, new skills to master, new ways to help others find their way from survival to security. "Time for her bedtime story," Grace said, as Piper stirred slightly. They moved to the nursery, now professionally decorated but still featuring the rocking chair from their first days together. Marcus settled into it with practiced ease, Piper snuggling into her familiar position. "Once upon a time," he began, telling the story they never tired of sharing, "there was a man who thought he was invisible, but then he found a very special box, and inside was an even more special baby." Piper drifted off to sleep as he continued the tale, her tiny hand wrapped firmly around his finger. Grace leaned against the doorframe, watching them with a soft smile. This was his world now, not the shadows of survival but the light of family. Not just protecting a found child, but building a future for others who needed a chance. The street survivor had become something more, something better, all because of a choice made on a cold night behind a convenience store. Marcus looked down at his sleeping daughter, then up at Grace. They had created something remarkable together, a family forged in crisis, but strengthened by choice. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunity to prove that trust and love could overcome any obstacle. In her crib, Piper slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was protected, cherished, and most importantly, home. The same security Marcus had spent his life seeking, he now provided. The same chance he had received, he now offered to others. Outside, Chicago continued its eternal rhythm, but inside this room, in this moment, everything was perfect. A father, a daughter, a family created not by blood, but by the choices that defined them. This was what survival had prepared him for, what every hardship had led toward, not just living, but truly being alive.